Every budget is supposed to be as many of us have said, a statement of our shared values, but they don't all achieve that efficiently unless there's constant reminders of our shared values. So I really want to thank Council President Navarro for constantly reminding us our shared values in this big, fractious county full of multiple opinions, because I'm particularly excited that you've united the council and so many of us behind the mission of achieving racial equity and social justice this year. That's something many of us have worked on for years, and it's just very fulfilling to be at the dais formalizing that as a lens that we're going to reconsider our policies through in the coming years. I'm very much looking forward to that, and I'm very excited about this budget because I think it reflects that in dozens of ways. I also want to thank County Executive Mark Elrich. He had big shoes to fill, and he came into office relatively recently and inherited a budget that had been largely shaped before he arrived, and before his administration was even fully in place, he had to send us a savings plan. We've had some disagreements over individual items, but I'm very glad he's been so attentive to the council, leaving space in the proposed budget for our additional priorities, fighting for the county every day of the legislative session in Annapolis, which really paid dividends, and working with us to find solutions to the school funding and closing that gap. I also want to thank, now he's disappeared, but Budget Director Rich Madalino. You'll have to tell him, I called him out, and all his terrific staff. I knew that Rich would arrive in this job using his deep understanding of the budget to hit the ground running. He's really done that and been a great partner to work with, and I really look forward to working with him and all his staff in future years on the restructuring of government that we're really looking forward to achieve the structural savings that we very much need. And I certainly want to thank our constituents. I try to every year, the taxpayers of this county who are generous and wise enough to support a progressive and a responsible budget, and the hundreds of organizations and thousands of residents who follow our work, and they turn out at hearings and they testify at hearings and they call and email us with feedback and criticism and occasional compliments. I'm grateful for all of it. I wouldn't want to do this work in many other jurisdictions where folks have different values and don't participate as much as they do in Montgomery County, and we saw this year we maintained our reputation for deep and robust civic engagement on the budget. Overall, this is a budget that's principled, but it's prudent. It meets our obligations with respect to our essential services that our residents count on, like public safety, transportation, health care, and environmental protection, and I'm glad we got there without a tax increase. I'm very glad it fully funds our schools above the Board of Education's request, and I'm very excited about the new programs that the new educational funding will help, including reducing elementary school class sizes, expanding dual enrollment and middle college programs for high schoolers that are taking college classes, helping MCPS administer and expand the Summer Rise program, and adding counselor and psychologist positions based on enrollment and to enhance services, an area that I think we've neglected for too long. I'm glad it's adding assistant principal positions to elementary schools without one, and increasing the language exposure at elementary schools, which there's more and more demand on and continues to be extremely important. And finally, I'm glad that it's strengthened and improved the background checks of school staff to make sure our kids are really safe. Excellent schools are critical not just to our children, but the county's whole well-being, and I'm very glad we were able to fully fund it above the request of MCPS. In my first year as the chair of the Transportation Committee, we made some important changes. I'm really grateful to Council Members Reamer and Glass for very much being approaching this in a collaborative way, for being on the same page about our values in the areas of transportation and the environment. Councilmember Reamer, I especially appreciate your advocacy to restore funding for the ride-on routes and the BIPAs, which I like to say as often as possible. And Councilmember Glass, I very much appreciate your laser focus on improving transit, making it work, and building the next generation of transit riders, because it's not going to work without them. Climate change is another lens that we must view all our county activities through. It's significant that we secured $400,000 to fund a plan of action to mitigate climate change. And while it wasn't everything we wanted this year, I think it's important to start this important investment to make sure we're making our future investments in the most effective ways. And in the capital side, two highlights for me, including restoring the win we had, the Three Amigos had 2 years ago, replacing the Forest Glen Metro passageway under Georgia Avenue, to restoring it to our original schedule to demonstrate our commitment to pedestrian safety and accelerating $10 million in additional capital funding for road resurfacing, something that's going to benefit every area of the county. And I especially want to thank our committee staff, Dr. Orlin, Mr. Levchenko, and Mr. Smith for their outstanding work making us look good and easier than it usually is. As the District 5 council member, I have to mention a few highlights that we pushed for in this budget cycle, and I'm grateful to my colleagues for supporting. I know they're going to have a big impact for my constituents. First, the right to vote is fundamental to everybody, but too many of my constituents waited an hour or 2 hours at Praisner to vote last fall. Other folks waited all over the county to vote, and many didn't get to vote because they were waiting in lines that were far too long. So I'm grateful to all of you, and especially to the County Board of Elections Board Chair Jim Shalek and David Naiman in particular for helping us secure $125,000 for new funding for ballot scanners to reduce the wait times. Because as the 2020 election approaches, we need to make sure everybody in this county gets to vote. We also added the $273,000 successfully for Progress Place for security officers trained in crisis intervention. Grateful to Councilmember Glass and all of you and the advocates who pushed for this solution. And we're not done. We're going to have to continue to work together to make sure Progress Place can live up to its promise. And in the school CIP, I'm very glad we restored the planning money for Highland View Elementary School and the funding for Francis Scott Key to prevent that cluster from going into moratorium, something that's happening far too often. That would have undermined the new development efforts in East County. And I'm very glad we restated this council's support for White Oak and our commitment to it and the economic development promise that it represents. Grateful to Betsy and Rob and all the advocates for pushing, and Pete for pushing for that so hard as well. We also funded something I'm really excited about that didn't get much attention, a critical funding for mental health and critical wraparound services for at-risk students at Paint Branch and Springbrook clusters. We all know we have way too many students that are facing enormous stress and mental health challenges, and this is just a start, but it's going to make a big difference for many of them and, you know, potentially prevent some tragedies. In East County, council members Jawando, Albornoz, and I fought for the funding for the critical short-term drainage and field quality issues at White Oak's only ball field. It's a clear, obvious equity issue. It's long neglected, wouldn't have happened without the advocacy of Coach Fofo, and I'm very glad we're addressing the long-term maintenance by putting it under the jurisdiction of Park and Planning. And finally, we funded Montgomery Cares, which serves all of us, but especially many of my constituents' urgent health needs. I want to discuss with the HHS committee going forward, possibly partnering with neighboring jurisdictions so we can achieve some efficiencies, since we're caring for many residents of Prince George's and Howard County as well as the district. And I'm glad we funded the capital grant for MANA. So to wrap up, as always, we have to keep a keen eye on the future. Making these budget decisions is one of the council's most important responsibilities. We have to be accountable to our residents to ensure we're prudent stewards of the county's fiscal future. This budget helps us achieve that, achieves our long-standing goal of a healthy financial reserve. We safeguarded our AAA bond rating, and I'm very confident that we continue to have a very bright future ahead of us. I want to thank my colleagues for working together so well. This is the first year at the dais for all 9 of us, and in this as a group. And now you know what you're getting into. But it's been a great process. It's been easier than previous years and more collaborative, Council President. And I definitely need to thank my own staff, Dave and Andrea and Brian, Bob, Sean, and Jill, as well as our central staff, Marlene, Megan, Bob, and all the central staff for all their valuable research and assistance throughout the budget process and the rest of the year. And I look forward to continued work throughout the year. Thank you very much.